If I remember to turn it off, I will. No, we need the volume from there. So the video's working, okay.
Sweet.
Now we want,
I'm so disappointed. I did not put your cornerstone grab the open. Oh, I'm sorry. I won't be back.
let's see,
Hey, I'm also bad on TV.
do we have,
Where you go?
Bathroom.
No. It's a little bit.
oh, you know what?
Great.
What? So we do have the video from up there. I don't know that we have. I'm gonna stop recording.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Diane.
Where is everybody?
I don't know. Maybe they forgot.
All the important people are here.
That's right.
Hey, Jim, what town are you in?
Can you guys hear anything in the room?
Architect, yeah, I just, all right, how about now? How about now?
Now I can hear. Now I can hear you.
Okay, the Logitech is working. Go with the real tech.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And can you see us?
Yes.
Okay. I think we're good then, right?
Okay, so maybe it's the volume on the TV itself that was down. The TV
Now,
show.
the question is, what is that mic just on your laptop? Will they be able to hear? Can Francisco speaking, can you hear me?
It's a little soft.
It's a little soft. Okay. Microphone. Room, so we're gonna have to use the laptop with I think we can handle this. We're gonna move it closer to me and I'll be sure to speak up. And can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just speak up.
Diane, can you hear?
Diane, we can't hear you. Oh,
She's
muted.
muted.
You're muted.
I can't even figure out which one's.
Sorry. Yes, I can hear that.
Very funny.
Where are you? You're not in the normal room you're normally in.
No, that's wrong.
Yes, I am.
So you couldn't make it to the town hall, huh?
Well,
Well,
I had some other issues going on.
I understand.
I had to work late.
Ever since I've known you.
Right, right. At least I'm consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every breath.
Yeah. And my wife was in the hospital last week, and I walk up, and they take your temperature, and it would tell me I'm normal. I said, no one ever, no
microphone
no
usually
one in
on
the
the-
world ever told me normal.
Where's the microphone?
You know,
Can I
it
get
differs
that
on every
too?
computer.
Are you thinking it's that?
Sometimes it's right up. No, it's just a pinhole. It's the pinhole, I think, that's right next to the camera.
Oh, okay. But just share it. I'll just.
To flip screens, I would like to do this.
I'm so used to drive a bus.
You're not driving a bus.
Take mine out.
No, actually,
Put yours in.
have to-
And you'll flip it? That makes life even better.
My battery's working. It is.
So now I don't have to do anything.
Right.
I'm good.
Let's bring it up just to make sure.
On there.
it's working.
It's this one.
Oh, it's.
On so you can maximize it. Oh, but we want to do the max. Oh, yeah, no, so you need to go back. Yeah.
Well, I can.
And go back to Zoom.
So that'll share the screen, but the trouble is you're in the browser.
Uh-huh.
And in the browser, I'm not going to be able to go into presentation mode with the PowerPoint.
Oh, they have in the past. Guess not. Okay.
So, which is
Oh,
fine.
you
We
know what?
just-
He probably put it on the flash drive before.
So we
That's
just
probably
need
what they
to
have.
download it to the desktop and open up PowerPoint, run it from there, which.
Which I've never done. Okay, so here somewhere is gonna be downloading it.
File, save as. Download a copy. Open file.
Yay.
We'll share that. That's
Now I'm sharing my screen. So now I can actually minimize all that.
Yeah.
Get rid of all this other stuff that we don't need. Excuse me.
This.
Your place on-
I really don't want them to. They can't.
Yeah, they'll just see your only PowerPoint. So we'll see.
Are you good?
Yeah, just go to presentation mode. Full screen.
Now we're doing something new.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. Perfect, perfect. And a quicker ones. So we're in great shape.
Okay.
They bought a place in
All right.
Florida, they bought a place
We've done
in
it.
Cape.
I think we're good.
I-
I see Viola's here. I know Mr. Rogan's coming, and then for the normal commissioners, we have Diane online. But George Miller's not. Right. So he's absent. Legnani's absent. Woman's absent.
Woman isn't on the,
No, he's not gonna be on so that's what he told me, once he had to change it.
And
already shows
did
up.
I hear Steve Yella
Steve
was in
Bale
here?
is here, and
Okay.
Logan's on his way.
John, Peter, and
Yep, I'm here.
G. Princess. Okay,
Yeah,
there we go. So we have a quorum of people, Madam Secretary, Madam President.
yeah. So do you want to just tell those people who are zoomed in?
Okay.
Do we want to just give a little word?
So this is the 2003 Plan of Conservation and Development Committee meeting and Affordable Housing Plan discussion. And the following committee members are present: Steve Biella Jr., Diane Jorsey, Joan Veely, Peter Zaragoza, and Timothy Zigmont, with staff Maureen Giusti and Jim Mahoney, and our consultant Francesco Gnomes from FHI Studios.
Okay, terrific. So it was it was 2013, and here we are already at 2021.
Did I say 2003?
Yes.
It's September 23rd, 2021.
Yeah,
There we go.
there you go.
It all sounded the same underneath the mask. Could
Yeah,
have been anything.
exactly. It was all good. All right, so how do we begin this process?
All right, well,
You're gonna do it, we're just gonna watch the movie. Okay.
yeah, we could turn it over to me, and so let me give a brief reorientation to everyone, because it's been a couple months now since we initially met, just to kind of agree upon the scope of the work and the schedule. So once again, I'm Francisco Gomes with FHI Studio. We are the consultant that was hired to assist the town in developing both the Plan of Conservation and Development and the Affordable Housing Plan. And that is going to be, and I'll get into the schedule briefly, but we're at the very beginning of a process that's going to last a little more than a year. And we'll conclude with both your Affordable Housing Plan, meeting the state's requirement, and your 2023 Plan of Conservation and Development. This is the first of what will be multiple monthly meetings as we develop the plan. And we're getting off to a pretty soft start in that there's not a lot of actionable items for the commission or the committee at this point, that we're easing in with the discovery process, which involves myself and my team learning about your community, what it looks like, what's transpired over the last 10 years since you wrote the last plan. And then as we ease into things, we will have work for you to do. And tonight we have some homework, but what's great about tonight's homework is we're going to do it in the classroom. We're going to do it right here. And that is a visioning exercise. So let me go over the agenda. And so our agenda is, I'll give you an overview of our schedule so we're all on the same page. And then we'll get into our demographic and socioeconomic trends and findings. We've been collecting census data and data from other sources over the past month or so. And we package that all up together. And I hope you find it very interesting and informing. We'll also get into some preliminary housing numbers. And I say preliminary because we have a lot more work to do in this area in support of the Affordable Housing Plan. And we have a sub-consultant, RKG, on our team, and they specialize in housing and economic development, and they'll help us with the housing component. They develop they have a housing demand model they generate to figure out where your real housing need is, and that will be incorporated into both the Affordable Housing Plan and the POCD. After that, we'll have discussion, and as you have questions or comments as we go along, feel free. We have a small enough group. Feel free to speak up and ask a question or make a comment. And then we'll move on to a visioning exercise. I would like you to start thinking about Berlin, what makes this place special, how you would like to see the community grow and change over the next 10 years. And then we'll wrap things up by talking about next steps and the affordable housing plan and how we're going to steer that process. So our project schedule. So here we are in September, getting started with you, our collaboration with you, with the P&Z Commission, with the committee that steers it, will last through the duration of the project. And that takes us all the way out until December of 2022, which is roughly 15 months worth of work. We will do community engagement for much of that time. We've got a decent amount of work to do before we're ready to get out into the public and start getting the public involved in this process. And we'll talk more about this as we get further into the process. But we plan on doing an online survey. We plan on doing focus group meetings, larger public meetings, interviews, and we want to engage the public to the greatest extent possible. And it'll be a couple of months yet before we're ready to do that. We need to get our feet on the ground first. Existing conditions, we started this already, and this is the process of gathering up all the information, data, mapping, and getting a real lay of the land. And that's about the front half of the process. Concurrent to this, as I've mentioned, is the Affordable Housing Plan. Affordable Housing Plan is a new requirement or mandate by the state of Connecticut, and it's due in June. And they require you to come up with a plan for how it is that you're going to improve or increase affordable housing in the community to meet the state's mandate of 10%. And we'll take a look at those numbers throughout this presentation. That plan also needs to go through a period of public review and finally adoption at a public hearing. And then we have our POCD document. So at some point, we're going to switch gears once we have our existing conditions work done, we get our affordable housing plan done, we'll start focusing on your POCD document itself. And I say the document because all the work we're doing is really leading up to that plan and that document. But we're really not going to start to assemble that document until about halfway through the process once we have all the information that we need. And then that has a review period, a public review period, and we need to send that to your legislative body and to the COG for review. And so that period takes a couple of months. So in order to get this done by the end of 2022, to have it ready for a 2023 plan, we need to wrap up our document by October of next year. And then the town.
How fast, I mean, the months go by real
Oh,
quick.
it does. It goes, you know, when you think a year and a half, think, oh, we have lots of time, and it really burns by amazingly quick. It does. The town also asked us to take a look at their.
Excuse me, Francesco. It
Yes.
sounds as though our online didn't go beyond the first screen. They're not seeing us continue.
Right.
Are you
Yeah,
folks not seeing the project schedule?
Did I
No,
not?
it looks, we're seeing slide 1, but it looks like you're on slide 3.
So you're just seeing the cover.
Yep.
Wow, we are seeing it on both of our screens here. We're seeing the correct slides. So yeah, let me try a new share. We're going to try to reshare this. And we of course apologize for any technical difficulties.
With COVID, we're used to it.
Yeah, we are, aren't we?
There we go.
Okay, we had
Much better.
we had multiple PowerPoint windows to choose from, and apparently we chose the wrong one, but we've got it right now, correct?
Please
Yes,
tell
we
us
can
if
see
it
that.
doesn't advance.
Okay, thank you. So you didn't miss much. I talked our way through the agenda, and you missed all the animations. My staff took all the time to build into this slide, but that's okay. And thanks for speaking up. So the last major scope item here is that the town asked us to take a look at the BTD zoning district. That's the Berlin Turnpike District. and to help them make some adjustments to make that more relevant to the development opportunities that you're seeing on the district. And so we will take a few months in the course of this process to make some recommendations to that effect. And of course, that will be, those recommendations will be reviewed by all the parties necessary to review. All right. Now we're on the right slide, but my slide clicker isn't advancing. All right, I'm going to move the laptop closer to me and. Okay, there we go. So here we get into our content, population trends and characteristics. So here we're going to take a look at census data. And we have a couple of different forms of census data, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Unfortunately, we are like a year out from having 2020 census data, which would be really nice. And we might backfill some key metrics with 2020 data if it comes out in time. But fortunately, the Census Bureau for the past decade has been producing something called the American Community Survey. And that is a smaller sample size that's conducted every year. And you may have received one of these over the past decade. That helps keep the numbers fresh, and it also goes into a little more detail in certain areas. So we're able to pull American Community Survey data up until 2019. So we have very recent numbers. There's a bigger margin of error on that data because it's a sample size that it's extrapolated from, and not a census of every household, but it's very useful information to us and will allow us to see some trends. So that's my preamble to the data. But let's get into the data, and let's start with population change. Berlin's population grew at, as you can see in the chart there, at a very steady rate between 1980 and 2010. And that growth has slowed since 2010. So you can see it at the very top tapering off in 2010. So in 1970, you were at 14,000 residents. And as of 2019, you're around 20,000 and change. And that the population over the past 10 years, that contraction or the growth that you've had was seen mostly in your retired age folks, right? Age 65 and plus, and as low as 60 to 64. With a little bit of growth in between, but you experience losses, and those are the red bars pointing down in the age cohorts of under 5, so you're very young children, 20% less, 10 to 14, 30 to 34, and 35 to 39, and 40 to 44. So what you're seeing is you have you've experienced loss in your families, really your family age, the young children and parents. So you're getting older as a community. These trends are actually fairly consistent with what's happening in Connecticut as a whole. And so I wouldn't be too alarmed that there's something unique happening in Berlin that's not happening in other places. It's very typical in Connecticut. So when we compare you to the state and to the region, and most of my references to the region this evening will be to Hartford County, what we see is you're actually doing much better than both Hartford County and Connecticut with respect to population growth, and that's been consistent since 1970. So Berlin is the blue chart, the darkest blue on the left, followed by Hartford County, and the lightest blue is Connecticut. And what you can see is really positive growth numbers from 1970 all through this past decade. In the 80s, 11% growth over the 80s, whereas the state and Hartford County were half that. And Hartford County's numbers have been very low since really since the 70s have been the lowest. And when we get into 2010, 2019, those bars are barely showing up. They're actually there, but they're barely showing up because the growth is so flat and in fact negative in Hartford County, whereas Berlin's had 3.1% growth. So you're doing much better than the region and the state. So you're doing something right, but you are getting older and you have a smaller share of families with respect to your growth. Now, the state conducts population projections just for planning purposes, and these are only projections, and this is very much a moving target. By example, the numbers I have here don't account for COVID-related impacts to migration, and we know that Connecticut's had some in-migration from New York. May or may not have affected Hartford County. It certainly has affected Fairfield County. But what we see is that the state's population projections for Berlin it's a mixed bag from between 20 and 24. Basically, they're seeing a lot less younger folks and less folks between 45 and 64. And a lot more folks retirement age and older, and with a group in their 30s, early 40s remaining positive in growth. So these projections are based on a lot of factors. They're based on your birth rate here, death rate. They're based on in-migration, out-migration, housing starts, all those factor in. There are a lot of things that could happen that would change these trends, but from the best information the state has, and these numbers were calculated in 2017, so they're already 4 years old. But the best information they had at that stage showed growth in some age cohorts but contraction in others. Now we compare you to both Hartford County and the state with respect to those growth trends. The darkest blue line there is Berlin. And what we see is very, very similar trends as both Hartford County and the state for folks under 40. Over 40, you start to contract a little bit more than both the state and the region. And over 65, you're growing a lot more in population than both the state and the region. And when we take a look at the growth curve, so Berlin's the dark blue line on the bottom, starting in 2020 and extending out to 2040, what the state projects is that you will continue to grow all the way into 2030, at which point you will peak, and then population starts dropping off. And what I find most interesting is, conversely, is the population change in Hartford County drops and then picks back up. And let me just retract or revise what I just said about Berlin. It's actually not that you're growing, it's that the rate of loss diminishes as you get into 2030. They expect that you have loss. You're going to be experiencing population loss starting in 2020 over the next 10 years, but it's going to start to slow until 2030 until it picks back up again. And the opposite thing's happening in Hartford County, where the rate is positive, but then it starts to increase. All right, let's talk about population density. Geographically, you're a fairly large community by Connecticut standards. So even though you have a decent sized population of more than 20,000, your density is relatively low at 779 residents per square mile. Hartford County is a little less than twice that. And Connecticut is, as a whole, Connecticut has lower population density. So within the county, and of course, cities like Hartford skew some of those numbers towards density. Within the county, you're relatively low density. Now, when we take a look at the demographics of that population, and let's start with race and ethnicity. What we see is you are far less diverse than both Hartford County and the state, which I think you probably all understand that quite well. So starting on the left, the lightest blue is your non-white population, and then we divide that up into foreign-born, and also we use English proficiency as a measure. And by all standards, both Hartford County and the state are far more diverse. And when we take a look at the actual race and ethnicity,
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
have to go back
Yeah.
to that statement you said that Hartford County and the state are more diverse than our town is.
yes,
So somebody in Essex or Deep River, Old Saybrook, Stonington, they're more diverse than we are.
the state as a whole, when you average out the state, because you're factoring in
Yeah, but-
Bridgeport and Hartford and all
And
of our
New Haven.
cities and New
Okay.
Haven, where our diversity is concentrated, your Berlin, well, really all the suburbs are far less diverse. So it's not unique to Berlin. And you're right, when you talk about some of the towns on the shore or in Fairfield County,
Mhm.
Weston or Easton or any of these communities, they're even less diverse than Berlin. But comparing you to Hartford County, you can just see the size of those charts. The non-white population, Berlin's 7.4%, Hartford County is basically 4 times that in non-white population.
But really what drives those numbers is the major cities. It's really
Absolutely.
your Bridgeport, your Hartford.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
all right, I
and,
just-
but major cities and some towns as well. East Hartford, Manchester is a big town, kind of a
Yeah.
city, but Manchester has a lot of diversity. Bloomfield, so
Yeah.
some towns do as well, but the cities skew that
Yeah,
just because
okay.
the amount of population
Mhm.
and then the intensity of diversity that they have within the cities.
Mhm. Okay.
So
How about
you-
Middletown?
Oh, Middletown too is far,
Yeah.
So
far
if you-
more
if you-
diverse.
if you-
Yeah.
If you have a child population that said the 60,000 town
Yeah.
and the 20,000 town, I mean.
Yeah.
Your percentages would go a bit.
So,
not
and that's-
good.
And that's
Yeah.
why we're using percentages, because we want an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah.
So, we're trying to understand the characteristics of your community and how you compare to the state and the region as a whole. There's not a problem we're trying to solve here with respect to the demographics of your community. But what we want to do is we want to understand the characteristics of your community so that we can make recommendations that are going to support the community that you have, whether it be the type of housing that you need, the type of services that the town might need to provide.
Mhm.
So there's not a problem that we're trying to solve here. It's really about just understanding how you are similar to or different than other communities, and also to better understand, because we very often get challenged with questions or comments about other communities. Well, this community does that, and they provide these kind of services, and they have this kind of development. Why can't we do that here? Or why doesn't Berlin have that? And so our response in many cases would be, well, your demographic profile is very different. You have different needs than other communities. And so that's part of what we're trying to do here, is to understand the demographics of your community and what the needs are going to be in the community.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I just needed to point that out.
Oh, of course, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And feel free, if you have any questions about
yeah.
anything. feel
The
free
only
to-
problem I see with most of these figures that you're showing is that they're old.
Yeah,
And Berlin has done this big switch as far as I see.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
In the last 10 years, maybe, and even in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because of what we've improved in
Sure.
the town for different type of housing.
Yeah.
And, so, I'm working on old figures is. a
So this is
little weird.
2019. This is
Yeah.
2019. So this is
So
pretty
is
current
new.
data. And we are going to do some looking back at some of these numbers back to
Yeah.
2010 or before
Yeah.
to understand the context, where you've come from.
Yeah.
All right,
We're
to tell a
talking
little
where
bit of
we
the
are,
story.
you know,
Yeah,
that's
very
what-
much so.
That's because we made a big advance.
Yeah.
And I've seen over the years.
Yep.
But we've done it, I think, in the right way, in the sense of protecting the community and
Yeah, I'll
and
look at
keeping safe
I'll
the
look at
things
the
that
community.
make it endearing.
The population and everything else, I think we've
Yeah.
done a good job there,
Yeah.
but,
Right.
that's,
Okay.
That's what
Okay.
I want to see, right?
All right, thank you.
All right. So we'll talk a little bit more about race and ethnicity, and here we get into race and ethnicity by categories: white, black, Latino, Asian. And once again, comparing Connecticut on the left to Berlin on the right, and the blue bar is your white population. So you're less diverse racially than the rest of the state. Let's talk about age and how you are similar to or differ in age from both the county and the state. And you're an older community. And even when we take a look at median age, so we took a look at the charts that show that where your growth is happening is in retirement age and seniors. And those numbers bear out when we take the median age, the middle point, the age that would be the age of the person who's right in the middle, who has the same number of people younger and the same number of people older than that person on either side. And that person is 47 and a half years old in Berlin, but only 40 years old in Hartford County and 41 in Connecticut. So these themes about being an older community, when we start talking about housing and when we get into talking about what Berlin needs with respect to housing, it's going to point to some discussions about the type of housing that you need for seniors, or what we'll need for seniors in the community, assuming that they can't or don't want to remain in a single family home, which you have a lot of stock of, and we'll talk about. Poverty, your poverty rate is significantly lower than Hartford County and the state. It's less than half of both, and I think we'll see that in your median income numbers as well. You're a relatively affluent community. So let's talk about household characteristics. The average household size in Berlin is decreased, and that's because families are getting smaller. So just between 2010 and 2018, and that 2014-2018 range is a reference to the ACS data, which is averaged over a 5-year period. So really between 2000 and 2018, what we see is average household size shrunk from 2.67 to 2.48. So your families are getting smaller, which means your households are getting smaller. And it may be that there's even more single occupant, if you want to call it that, households, individual person households.
So that reflects the size of the house.
Well, the number of family members in it.
Okay.
And so people are having less children. That's happening across the state, across the country. So there's some contraction related to that. Also, if you are a community that's getting older and you have less growth in your number of families, it means you're going to have more just senior couples and households, and even maybe more seniors living alone in a household. And all of those will shrink that household number. What's interesting is that both Hartford County and Connecticut remained relatively flat over that period, and Berlin shrunk.
Never figure out how you have, how does it for 2.67 person? I couldn't.
We always,
I wasn't gonna use that, yeah.
It's
Two people
splitting
in a house where
hairs.
you have three. I'm
We
really-
Yeah.
always use in Berlin, we always use
I
two,
know.
Split.
two and a half, I don't know where half were.
Right, right,
We always
right,
use two and a half.
Yeah, I know, that's,
And it's really close, 2.5, right? That's what we've been
Right.
using.
unfortunately, if we didn't cut somebody into pieces, then our numbers would just look the same, you know, we would have been at 3 for a long, long time. And then all of a sudden, you would have dropped to 2 overnight. What happened? Who moved out? Right?
Thank God.
But they come back.
Graduated.
Yeah.
I graduate and come back. Oh, no.
So if when we dig further into your household types, and we compare you both, Hartford County and the state, let's start at the top. So these are householders living alone. And Berlin, as of 2019, actually had fewer, I should say, households with somebody living by themselves than Hartford County or Connecticut. One of the reasons being is because your housing stock is primarily single-family residential. And you don't, although you had a lot of apartment construction over the past 2 decades, you don't have a lot of apartments compared to Middletown or Hartford or Meriden, or you pick a city. And so because you don't have a lot of apartments, studios, or 1-bedrooms, you have far fewer households with just one person. However, when we take a look at your households with someone older than 60, that's where you're higher, right? At 48%. Hartford County and the state are more or less the same. Similarly, when we take a look at your households with someone under 18, so basically households with a child, you have less of those, which means you're lagging in your family households looks like the number of those are shrinking, or they're just less than Hartford County and the state, which that one probably surprised me the most, because I think of Berlin as like a family community, a place where you go because you want your kids to be in school here.
History of Berlin, right after the war,
Yeah.
they built all these small little 1,000-foot, 800-square-foot
Cape Cods and ranches.
Yeah. So the house has got a big stock of
Real
small
small GI,
small
big
ranches.
GI house.
So then,
Yeah.
that came up with the 60s there,
Right.
and people living by themselves, if they can do a little small ranch,
Yeah.
they can't do a big house.
So related to that is exactly what you're seeing with your age dynamics, is that you had this tremendous post-World War II boom. You had families moving into those houses, some baby boomers being born into them. And those folks are still kind of hanging around. And there was a lot of them that came into the community at that time, and they're aging through the community. And they're now your seniors. And there's a lot of them. And while you've had a lot of housing development over the past several decades, you haven't caught up to that one period. And so you haven't replaced in the same way. And which is why you're getting older, and your population growth is now flat, and according to the state, it's projected to be declining over the next couple
That's
decades.
exactly what that's basically it.
Yeah.
Is that, the older residential people that were down originally,
Yeah.
they built those small houses, and then they died off, but the children.
Yeah, they're children, the baby
The
boomers.
baby boomers,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Stayed in town.
Yep.
They wouldn't move out, I'm
Right.
born in Redboro. So, at 69 years old,
Yep.
I'm one of those who won't move out of Berlin.
Yeah.
So, now the younger people are moving out.
I moved in,
So the age goes up.
Yeah.
I moved in from New Britain.
Right.
Hey, if people are staying in their retirement, that means they're happy with Berlin and.
Yeah.
I like that.
Downside,
Yeah.
either
So-
they had the big house, downsized to the
Yeah.
smaller one of those ranches,
Mhm.
right? Sold the bigger house to you.
I got a little house.
So I think that's the exact, I think that's the conversation to be had is where is what's the demographic of your next generation of families and of residents? And how can the community appeal to those folks and support those folks? And what kind of housing are they looking for? And what kind of services and what's going to attract them? Right. Okay. So let's talk about median household income. As I mentioned, you're a fairly affluent community with median household income over 100,000, which is higher than both Hartford County and the state, which are very close to each other at 75 and 78,000. And when we take a look at the brackets, how those break out, and the Berlin's the darkest blue line there with Hartford County and the state stacked up on top of that. And in the past, my laser pointer would work on a screen because we were actually using projectors. So I keep trying to use it and it doesn't show up. So I'll use my cursor. So your greatest cohort of folks are right here in the $149,000 income bracket, and you're much higher. Oh, it's not even showing up on there. So if you look at the third group of bars down, you can clearly see the blue line that's extending into the screen. And that's your biggest income cohort is 100 to 150,000. And that is around 23, just shy of 23% of households in Berlin are in that income bracket. But when you go up from there, you'll see that you're also much higher than both Hartford County and the state in higher incomes, 150 to 199 and 200,000 or more. And where you're lower are in the lower incomes, and where it changes, it pivots. You're pretty similar to both Hartford County and the state in the 75 to 99,000 income bracket. And when you get below that, you're generally speaking, you have lower people in those lower income brackets. So the people that are working are well employed. They have good jobs. You're attracting people that can afford the housing, that have higher incomes, and so you're fairly healthy from a household income perspective. Let's take a close look at, or a brief look at schools and some of the school trends. And I think we'll see some very similar trends, and the graphs will look similar to your population trends. So school enrollment. The blue bars are Berlin, and that dark blue line is Connecticut. Going back to the 2011 to 2012 school year and up until last year's school year, the 2020-2021, you had a contraction year over year of your students. And so you started out with about 3,000, a little more than 3,000 students in the Berlin public school system, K through 12. And now you're down at around 2,700 or so. The state also contracted over that same period of time. We went from about 560,000 students across the state to around 500,000. So it's a remarkably similar trend line. It's happening across the state, and it's related to a couple of things. One is our population has been flat. Well, Connecticut has lost population in some years, but it's generally been pretty flat. But as I mentioned before, family sizes are getting smaller, which means less children in school. This has some real implications for communities, because what's generally happening is that while enrollment is dropping, the cost doesn't go down. In fact, the cost per student just goes up precipitously when enrollment drops, because school districts have to maintain the same buildings. They still have to have a fleet of buses. They still have to pay teachers, and generally speaking, there are certain thresholds you have to go through before you don't need the same number of teachers that you had before. So generally, the teaching staff stays pretty stable. but the cost per student per pupil goes up every year when you lose students. And school districts do a lot of their own homework on this, their own building assessments and school projections. And we're not going to get too far into the Board of Ed's realm, but we do want to be mindful about these trends because it affects some of the decisions you make about the town's facilities, about your school buildings and how the buildings and the grounds are used and whether or not you have the right number of schools or too many schools or enough athletic fields or too many athletic fields. It affects all the decisions surrounding the services that the town provides to the Board of Education.
Okay, I have a question on that, and I know we don't want to go into the Board of Education's business, but do these numbers reflect the true citizens of Berlin when it comes to school enrollment? Or are we talking about the students that are also reported into the school from surrounding?
This is total enrollment. So this, right.
All right, so that
Yeah.
includes the kids that are coming from
Yeah,
the other schools.
It's total. We could parse out your local enrollment, but I mean, the outside district enrollment is a really small percentage. So even if we pull that out, it wouldn't change this chart all that much. It would shrink all those bars a little bit, but we would still probably see very similar trend of contraction.
All right, it's just that when you talk about schools reassessing to see if they need a school or if they can close a school or reduce, it's hard to realistically look at that if
Yeah.
the numbers are constantly being pumped up by citizens of
sure,
other towns.
Sure.
So I mean, it's kind of.
And which is to say, I just want to clarify things by saying that, no one's suggesting that that's the case here in Berlin, that as of yet, that, schools need to be closed or anything like that.
No.
But these are some of the conversations that other communities who have shrinking populations are talking about. Some communities are looking to form new regional districts or join a regional district. Other communities have closed elementary schools or consolidated schools. So that's something happening throughout the state in various parts of the state in response to shrinking enrollments. And we don't know where the schools are at in terms of their facility capacity. Usually Board of Ed will do their own facilities and enrollment study. I have not seen or come across a document as of yet from the Board of Ed for that. They may have something they could share with us and we could reach out to them. But the POCD as a whole, we typically within a POC when make recommendations that for anything that a Board of Education would really normally take action on, other than to maybe recommend that the town work with the Board of Education, do facilities planning, given the fact that there's this contraction in enrollment.
Yeah.
Or in some communities, the response has been to bring in students to stabilize enrollment, or to convert a school to a magnet school to do so. Those have been some of the solutions in other communities. Okay.
I guess you probably got a magnet school.
Yeah.
Pardon?
I guess you probably got a magnet school.
That would be
Oh,
good.
yeah.
Yeah,
That would be excellent.
Thinking about dropping the home.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you
sure.
for answering.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm looking at what numbers I'm looking at. Okay.
And then to take a look at your demographics of your school district as well. I mean, these numbers are very, or these demographics are very similar to your population as a whole. You're more white in Connecticut as a whole, and the diversity that you do have is primarily Latino and Asian. You have very little African American diversity in the community. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. We're staying on the subject of education, but educational attainment. So this is the educational attainment of everyone in your community over the age of 18. And what we see is that you're a fairly well-educated community with 41% of residents having a bachelor's degree or higher, and only 7% of your residents lacking a high school diploma. So you're a well-educated community, and that makes sense given the income your household incomes that we see here. And when we compare Berlin to both Hartford County and the state, and Berlin is that darkest or brightest blue line on the left, what we see is that you're higher in education in both graduate, bachelor's, and you're at lower levels of less than ninth grade, lower levels of no high school diploma. About the same in associates and some college, and a little higher with just high school graduates. That would be someone that graduated high school but did not matriculate on to university. And comparing the changes, so this is Berlin, but this is comparing Berlin in 2019 to Berlin in 2020. And what we see is you have,
In 2000.
or excuse me, no, I'm sorry, in 2000.
Sorry,
Thank
just
you,
wanted
Lauren.
to-
My champ, no, I didn't have a
Oh,
mask though to make an excuse about
Oh,
mumbling
no.
through that one.
It's all good.
Right. So what I want to point out is bachelor's degrees, you're in 2019, you have far more residents with a bachelor's degree than you did in 2000. And where you really experienced gains was in a graduate or professional degrees. So these are law degrees, doctors, other graduate degrees. You're at around 17% or so now compared to 10% in 2000. And in other areas, you have fewer residents with less than ninth grade diploma, fewer that have just some college but didn't graduate, and fewer with just a high school diploma. So you're moving towards a population that is shifting towards a graduate, and professional, and college degrees. All right, and so let's see how that translates to jobs and employment. Jobs and workers. I want to make sure I define these so you understand what we're talking about. A job would be a job here in town, distinguished from the worker. That's the job that a company has, the position they have, the job they have. The worker is the person. So when we talk about jobs in town, we are talking about all of your businesses in town that have jobs, that have employees. We're talking about employees or jobs in town. And when we talk about workers residing in town, we mean people that live in town that have a job, that work, are working or are employed. And so you have more jobs in town than you have workers residing in town, which means you're not to be confused with a bedroom community by any measure. So you're not a suburban bedroom community. You're a far more balanced community with respect to your economic development and commercial base, and balance with residential development. There are some communities that have, the graph would be jobs in town would be way down at the bottom compared to the workers residing in town. And the changes that we see over time are things are, not huge changes, relatively flat. You have about the same number of jobs in town in 2018 as you did 2013 as you did in 2008. And 2018 are the most recent numbers we have. This is a slightly different database that we pull from. This is also Census Bureau, but it's what's called longitudinal employer household dynamics, and different type of survey, and they pull information from businesses as well. So the jobs in town are relatively flat over that time, no big changes. And workers residing in town was pretty flat between 2008 and 2013. And some of that was related to the economy coming out of the Great Recession, where the unemployment rates were pretty high for a few years. So you had people not employed. And then as we recover following, roughly 2013 or so, going into 2018, you see more workers residing in town. And that's, some of that might be related to migration into town of people who have jobs moving into town and replacing maybe seniors that did not have jobs that are leaving town. But some of that could also be related to unemployed residents who then gained employment living in town. And that includes, this is all employment. So this is even part-time jobs. So this could also include high school kids and college kids, which we know during the Great Recession had a really hard time finding a job. So we had a lot more unemployment in that grouping. And it could be that you have a lot more of your high school and college age students have jobs now. And so your numbers went up by about 600 in that area. But we take a look at where those jobs are in Berlin versus Hartford County. And Berlin is the darkest blue. We see that in manufacturing, you're way ahead of Hartford County. You have twice as many jobs. In management of companies and enterprises, you have more jobs. You have slightly more in the retail trades, and in other areas, you're fairly comparable, if not lagging. So the areas where you lag Hartford County are in, by a notable amount, are in education. And one of the reasons being you don't have any universities in town. There are a lot of university jobs in Hartford and other communities. So you don't have educators in those areas, and some other factors as well. You have slightly less jobs in professional, scientific, and technical services, and in other areas you're fairly comparable. But I think manufacturing is where you really stand out. About 18% of your jobs in that industry compared to 10% in Hartford County. Right. Yeah, slightly smaller share in the, as I mentioned, in the healthcare field, but you don't have any big hospitals. Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
What falls under utilities?
Yeah. So yeah, that would fall into it. Yeah, any your utility providers, so Northeast Utilities would fall into that.
Maybe
Would they,
Yeah.
would that
Yeah,
be
they're
skewed
one of your
by
largest.
their management? Or would they be under utility or under management?
Okay.
Yeah, it could be split. It could be that a good part of their management is split into the management
Three
class
headquarters
of
are up
that.
there: Connecticut Natural Gas, Southern Natural Gas,
Yeah.
and Eversource.
Yeah.
So,
we have Xfinity here.
oh, and Xfinity, correct.
Comcast,
Yeah.
So we could dig into those numbers, but what we're showing is you're pretty much,
Just
you're very
curious, that's all.
similar to
Our
Hartford County.
questions are more curious.
And
Yeah, curious.
so, which is good. We will later on in this process, we'll have a meeting devoted to economic development. And we're really going to drill in to some of those numbers and take a look at your businesses, and because that's all relevant to the economic development recommendations of the POC. Okay. So comparing you more to the region, and this is jobs per capita. You're on par with towns here we pulled from some surrounding towns. With Cromwell and Plainville, you have about the same number of jobs per residents per capita, and Newington. Fewer than Rocky Hill per capita, but more than Middletown, New Britain, Meriden, Southington. And that goes back to the fact that, remember the chart I showed you before was the number of workers residing in town, and your jobs in town was higher. So you have a lot of jobs in town relative to your population. And when we take a look at your actual resident employment, so the slide before the other one were the jobs that you have in town. And now we're taking a look of the people that live in town, your residents, what do they do for work? What industry do they work in? What we see is healthcare is off the charts. And why is that? Well, because from Berlin, those folks can go to Hartford, they go to Hartford Hospital, they can go to St. Francis, they can go down to Middletown, they go to Middlesex County, they can head to Meriden, they can head just about any direction. So they can head down to Yale, New Haven. So you're incredibly well situated with respect to jobs in the healthcare industry, because your access to healthcare jobs in any direction is phenomenal. By example, my daughter's orthodontist had office, and they had an office in Wethersfield. They had one down in Middletown, and they had another one in the region, I forget where. And they rotated each day of the week. They had staff in a different office. So you ask yourself, well, if you were that orthodontist, where would you want to live? And Berlin, it would probably be one of your top choices because of access. So when we take a look at the shifts towards a more highly educated population, more graduate professional degrees, and the fact that you're higher income, what that says to me is the community really appeals to healthcare workers. And so that's something to remember, is that you're doing a very good job of attracting, retaining people working in the healthcare industry. And I think that I think you all have an understanding of the fact that that's where a lot of the growth is in the economy right now, is in healthcare, because of the baby boomers aging and needing additional healthcare. So again with those people. So the other areas where you have a lot of employment are in manufacturing, and you have manufacturing jobs here in town. That, if you remember going back to the prior slide, you're really strong in that sector. And then also your commuting distance to Pratt & Whitney, right? In either direction. Retail trade, you're strong. That's retail trade. There are a lot of jobs in that area, and you have a lot of folks. And once again, you have really good access to a lot of commercial areas, including the Berlin Turnpike. Finance and insurance, because the jobs up in Hartford. Education as well. And so that's who you're attracting. Who you have residents, fewer jobs in the fields of real estate, rental, leasing, and information in those areas. And they tend to be smaller industry sectors anyway. So if we take a look at how you've changed, and this is 2018 looking back to 2008. So what percentage of change have you had in those same sectors over that period of time? What we see is that you have, in the red is less, right? Going to the left is negative. You've had losses in those areas. Is in the management of companies and enterprises. You have fewer residents employed in that industry, less in IT, less in transportation, warehousing, retail, wholesale, and actually manufacturing, you had some contraction. But in everything else, you have more jobs from now to 2008. And part of that is the economy is rebounded in a lot of those areas. So you have more jobs in public administration, more jobs in arts, entertainment, healthcare, education, administration, utilities, more jobs, utilities and construction, and mining and well, around here is most of that would be quarries and quarrying, and that a lot of those quarrying jobs is Tilcon basically, right? New Britain, Newington, that's those jobs, and then agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. You have more jobs as well. So growth in some areas, contraction in others. Your residents like to work close to home. They like to stay close to home. They don't like to commute real far. So location is everything here in Berlin. When we take a look at top work destinations, it's number one is Hartford. And so the blue bar, the dark blue bar on the left is 2009, and lighter blue bar on the right is 2018. You have more residents working in Hartford now than you did in 2009. However, Hartford's still the top destination. Next to that is Berlin, residents working right here in town. And that is not common in communities. We very often see that the town in which people live, that it's further down on that list. After that, it's Newington, followed by or New Britain after that. And so New Britain, Berlin, and Hartford are up there with respect to where people are working. However, in 2018, there are fewer people working in New Britain than there were in 2009. But you gained more residents working in town between 2009 and 2018. So more people have jobs in town. And then the rest of the towns goes down the list: Middletown, Meriden, East Hartford, Rockyville, West Hartford, and then it goes down from there. So there are people headed in all directions, some people commuting down to New Haven and other corners of the state, but in much smaller numbers after West Hartford. Distance to employment, as I mentioned, your folks like to stay close from home, and most people in Berlin live or travel less than 10 miles to work. And these numbers are pretty consistent across Hartford County and the state. With respect to Hartford County, you're about the same in terms of your share of population that works within 10 miles of home, and that is around 57%. But when we take a look at those traveling, really commuting, long range commuters, 25 to 50 miles or even greater than 50 miles, you have a smaller share of folks in either of those classes. Now, what will be interesting to see as we start to get newer data in which we might have 2019 data by the time we're done, it'll be interesting to see if the Hartford line has extended commuting ranges. And unfortunately, the pandemic has disrupted all of that, because the Hartford line was really building ridership and had really good numbers to draw from. And the pandemic kind of shut all that down. And it's been rebounding since, but it will disrupt that. But there's the chance that the Hartford line is extending some of those commuter ranges, so that 5 years from now, when you take a look at the same data, what you'll see is that you have a greater share of people that are commuting maybe 10 to 24 miles or 25 to 50, because they can hop on the Hartford line, commute down to New Haven easier, or up to even Springfield easier, or commute down New Haven and then get on Metro North and go down Fairfield County or further. But the moral of the story is your residents like to work close from home, and that's what appears to be appealing about Berlin. All right, so we talked about households. Now I would like to talk about your actual housing characteristics, so the buildings themselves. As I mentioned before, you're primarily a single family, 1 unit detached community, and that is 79% of your housing stock in 2019. And then you have a real mixture of other types of housing, whether it be attached 1 units like townhouse type, or 2 units, duplexes, or 2 units up and down. And then after that, it follows anywhere from 3 to 4 unit buildings, or 20 units or more, in which case that's 5% of your housing portfolio. And most of those units are fairly new, which you see in some subsequent slides here. Compared to Hartford County and the state, you are far more single family detached housing oriented. Hartford County, it's 55%, and in the state, it's 58.9%. So you have much more of your housing in single family than both. Now, to take a look at where that development has occurred, when those housing units were built, comparing Berlin to both Hartford County and the state. This is looking back to 1990. What we see are very similar trends in Berlin as both Hartford County and the state. Looking from 1990 to late 90s, early 2000s, it's fairly stable, an uptick around 98 or so, and then some spikes in the 2000s. I think you all remember preceding the 2008 recession that there was a pretty crazy housing boom. So there's some spikes there that you see. And then a fallout, that's that dip that starts after 2006 and it's really precipitates from the 2008 housing crisis. Some fallout from that, and then a little bit of recovery since. But Berlin recovered a little earlier and has been fairly flat with housing permit activity since that time. And we'll dig a little more into those numbers for Berlin. Looking back to 1990, and this is just Berlin here. So we see those big spikes were in 2001 and in 2005. So those must have been bigger housing developments that were permitted during those years. But really falling off in 2014, 2012 or so, and not really recovering since. A bit of a recovery in activity, but not recovering to pre-2012 levels. So the 30-year or so average, between 1990 or the 20-year or so average between 1990 and 2012 was about 99 housing permits issued a year as an average. And over the past 8 years, it's only been 22. That's related to maybe some trends that are specific to Berlin. It may be that a lot of the easy developed land, the cheap developed land has already been developed. It may be that your zoning has been kind of maxed out in some of the districts where development is possible, or your zoning is a little prohibitive. But also, because of the fact that you're predominantly a single family residential community and most of your zoning is single family residential, what we see is that the cost of building single family residential has really gone up considerably over the past decade. And it's far less profitable for developers over the past decade because of the cost of materials and labor and all that. And so that's not where most of the development's been over the last decade. It's really been in multifamily and in smaller units as well. So that's also part of a national trend that's happening. Far less single family house starts, far less subdivisions at the very least in the Northeast. And that's being seen here in Berlin. However, as I mentioned, there has been growth in the multifamily rental area, and including in Berlin. So these numbers here show the multifamily residential development that have been approved, are under development, or were built here in Berlin. So what we see is in 2001 or prior, that you had affordable 70 units of affordable housing built right around 2001. Some of that was built a little prior to 2001. As we get into the 2001-2013 period, you had over 400 units in that 12 or so years of affordable housing built, and 63 units of market rate housing built. And then 2014 up until now, last 7 or so years, 112 units of affordable housing that have been approved or are under development, and 418 units of market rate housing approved or under development. And let me go back and say, in 2001-2013, there are some of those that were approved. Not 100% of those have been built. Some of them are under development or still approved and have yet to be built out. But point being, a lot of activity on the affordable housing front, the affordable rental housing front, multifamily, and market rate as well over the past 20 years. When we look at the age of your housing, what we see is you can almost split that pie chart down the middle, and everything older than 1969 is about half of your housing. And everything since 1969, the other half of your housing has been built. And the amount of housing built was fairly steady decade over decade from 1939 up until 2000 or 2009, with the exception of 1940, 1949. Why? Well,
Baby boomers.
World War II. World War II.
Baby boomers, yeah.
Right there, World War II. There's very, very little housing built between 41 and 44. There was very, very little housing built in the US and in Berlin. So otherwise, excepting for the 40s and World War II, a very consistent amount of housing built decade over decade with some fluctuations until we get to 2010 and really what the housing crisis and the economic recession did, the Great Recession did, is really slow down housing development here in Berlin. When we look at housing value, what we see is that you have a lot of high value housing here in town, and that lines up with your incomes in the community. 40% of your housing stock is in homes that are valued at over $300,000. So you have a lot of high value homes, and you have a very, very small number of homes under 200,000. A relatively small share of your housing is under 200,000. About half of your housing is in the $200,000 range, 200,000 to 300,000. It's 47%. When compared to Hartford County and Connecticut, what we see is your housing is higher value. Your median owner-occupied home value is higher at $283,000 in both the state and Hartford County. Now, when we look at housing tenure, and housing tenure is basically turnover. Tenure is kind of the opposite of turnover. You have high tenure, you have low turnover. Housing tenure in Berlin is really, really high at 92.4%. That means year over year. That means same residents as a year ago. 92.4% of the households, those people were in the house last year too, here in Berlin. And that's 5% higher than both Hartford County and the state. So people tend to stick around, they stay put. They're not moving around a lot.
Yeah, so we must be doing something right.
Yeah, they like it here. They like it here.
Well,
What the turnover also means though with a low turnover is you generally have a smaller share of housing that's available every year on the market for people to buy because there's low turnover. It's pretty stable, which isn't a bad thing. But what it means is there's not a lot of opportunities, and this doesn't include just owned homes. This is rental units as well. Even in your rental units, your tenure is probably pretty high, meaning that people are not just renting for 1 year; they're staying year after year. They're more long-term renters. So that's a good thing, but it also means that there's fewer opportunities for people to move in.
So we'll just have to
Yeah.
jump up and wait. That's when it gets in work.
Most of your housing is owner-occupied, 84%. And those numbers line up pretty well with the type of housing that you have. It's mostly single-family residential. And so here's the ownership rate when compared to Hartford County and Connecticut. And what we see is that it's much higher than both Hartford County and Connecticut by about 20 percentage points over Hartford County. Yeah, it's a good thing. And so it speaks to a couple of things. The type of housing that you have and the type of residents that you have. You have residents that can afford to buy housing. And you have housing that's predominantly the type of housing that you buy, you don't rent out. It's what it comes down to. Ownership Cost versus income. So when we compare, as I mentioned, you have higher incomes in town, but there's also ownership costs associated with the fact that you have higher value housing in town. What we see is that 25% of homeowner households with a mortgage spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And that is considered, more than 30% of your income is considered housing cost burden, where you're working really hard to pay for your housing. It's a challenge. 25% is only a quarter of your population. And that's of people with a mortgage. People with a mortgage tend to have higher housing costs because they're still paying off their homes. When we take a look at people without a mortgage, what we see is it's only 15%. So that's a very good indicator. So only 15% are housing cost burden. That means a lot of your seniors, retired folks and seniors that don't have a mortgage, a small share of them are struggling to pay housing costs. However, when we take a look at rental cost, and we'll get into rental cost burden in a moment, what we see is your rents in town are fairly expensive. 71% of your rental costs are over between $1,000 and $1,500 a month, and then you have a lot of your rentals are even higher than that. You have 11% in the $1,500 to $2,000 range, and 2% in the $2,000 to $2,500 range. So when you add those all together, what you get is about 84% of your rental housing is more than $1,000 a month, and which means that only 15% or so, it's actually just shy of 15%. These numbers are rounded, are units that are less than $1,000 a month. But when we take a look at rental costs versus income, what we see is that almost half, 49% of your renters are spending 30% or more of their income on rent. And generally speaking, renters tend to spend more of their income on rent for a couple of reasons. One is because they can't afford to buy a house because their income isn't great, so they're renting. So even though they're renting, they face high rental costs. So the greater share of their income is going to rent. The other reason being is because more renters tend to skew younger, and they're earlier in their careers, and they're just making less. Comparing Berlin to Hartford County in the state, what we see is that here are the numbers. The brightest blue there are your renters, followed by the middle bar is your owners, and the bar next to that are owners without a mortgage, and the middle one, owners with a mortgage. And Berlin's on the far left, Hartford County's the group in the middle, and Connecticut's the group on the right. Is you're very, very, very similar in housing cost burden, in your ratios and the proportions here, but you're a little less. You have fewer households in each one of those groups that are housing cost burden. So those are all good.
You're saying almost 50% of people in Berlin, right?
No, 50% of renters are spending more than 30%. More than 30% of their income is on housing costs.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That kind of threw me for a loop.
So this is
Family house.
this is share of households
Okay.
with housing costs of 30%.
Gotcha.
I know this,
Okay,
the
all right.
print is kind of
Yeah.
small. But those numbers are smaller than Hartford County in the state, not by much. So these trends are very similar across the state, but compared to the rest of the state, you're faring better in the area of housing cost burden. Once again, another comparison here, and this is 2019 housing costs as a percentage of income. Renters on average, so this is the average, on average spend 25% of their median income on rent, And renter median income averages 56,000 in Berlin. Your owners average an income of 129,000, and they're spending on average 15%, and then owners with a mortgage 18%, and then without a mortgage 9% of income. So this is averaging things out. And then finally, comparing those same numbers to Hartford County and Connecticut. On top is housing cost burden for renters. As a reminder, that's folks that are spending more than 30% of their income on rent. And those are the blue bars on the left. So anything blue or teal is housing cost burden. Anything gray is not burden. So up top, housing cost burden for renters, you can see it's Berlin, very similar to Hartford County and Connecticut, very similar numbers there. Housing cost burden for owners, Berlin's owners are a little less housing cost burden than Hartford County or Connecticut. Okay, so where does Berlin fit in to Connecticut with respect to how much money you need to make to afford housing in Berlin on average? So that's called a housing cost wage. So what does your average person need to make to afford housing in Berlin? And in Berlin is $23.65 an hour. This is households, not average person, but households. $23.65 an hour needs to be the combined income of that household, which puts Berlin almost right in the middle in the state with respect to housing cost wage. There are some communities in the state it's as low as $19 an hour, and some communities it's as high as $40 an hour. So you're more or less in the middle. Okay. Moving on to affordable housing, which is very much related to our discussion about housing cost burden. Here we're going to talk a little bit more about supply. Your affordable housing, and this is state defined or state qualified affordable housing. So let me clarify that very quickly in that when we talk about affordable housing, we can talk about, or we can mean housing that is affordable to people that are living or want to live in town. And so that's little a affordable. That just means affordability of housing. The state has a definition of what we call capital A affordable housing, because it's a definition, it's a term. And the state defines that based upon a few different types of housing or housing subsidies. So that includes tenant rental assistance, what's also known as Section 8. It includes mortgages that are backed by CHFA or USDA. It includes government assisted units. So that would be like housing authority type units. So that's what the state counts as affordable housing. Also, one other category is deed restricted housing, which you don't have much of here in Berlin, which basically means that that housing isn't allowed to be rented or sold past a certain income bracket. In total, based on the 2010 census, and we're
Francisco?
still. Yes, go ahead.
This is Jim. Can I just clarify? So
Yes.
with respect to these definitions with the Connecticut Department of Housing, so the government assisted can also be deed restricted. So in fact, essentially all of the government assisted housing, which would be housing that's financed by the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, the typical multifamily projects, is also deed restricted.
It's right. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, the 4 deed restricted units we call out here are independent of government assisted housing. Thank you. When we take a look at those numbers, what we see is that 9.24% of your housing stock, and this is of occupied housing units, are affordable under this definition of affordability. And so that that's out of the 8,000 housing units that were counted during the 2010 census. Now, why this matters is because the state has basically mandated or compelled communities to try to achieve 10% of state-defined affordable housing. If communities don't have 10% or make sufficient progress towards 10%, they are vulnerable to development applications that can bypass your local zoning regulations. So if a developer comes in and wants to build affordable housing in Berlin, and they decide they want to put in way more units than you allow at a greater density with more coverage, with smaller setbacks, whatever it may be, and they are going to provide affordable housing that is deed restricted or some other form of affordable housing, they can bypass the Planning and Zoning Commission and they can bypass your zoning regulations. They basically appeal to the state to bypass your local regulations. By achieving 10%, you basically become immune from those types of applications. So there's an incentive that the state has for communities to come up with their own ways of supporting and allowing affordable housing without it being forced upon you. And Berlin's very close, and we're going to take a look at how those numbers have grown over time. You are very, very close, and you have applications pending that will help you achieve that 10%. Yeah.
Can I ask about the deed restricted?
Yes.
I could think of four developments that found that have deed restricted things. You find 4 units. That's way below the deed restricted subdivisions that we have.
So
and that's why I don't wonder you got those figures.
So
Well, these are
as
2010.
Well, still, it's,
So these are.
so no, let me back up. The housing units are based on the 2010 census.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that real briefly, and then I'm going to try to address your question. I'll let Jim chime in because he knows the numbers well because he's had to provide them to the state every year. So we have numerator and denominator, right? So the numerator, the number on top that we're dividing by, are your total number of affordable housing units. And the denominator, the number we're dividing that by, are your total housing units. And the denominator that the state says we need to use are census, are every 10-year decennial census numbers. The last numbers we have are for 2010. And at some point later this year, next year, the 2020 numbers will be out. And we'll have 2020 numbers. All the other numbers are new numbers, are current numbers. So everything below the 8,000 housing units are last year's numbers, are up to date. The 4 deed restricted are deed restricted, as Jim tried to clarify, outside of things that were backed by government assistance, housing developments that were backed, that are also deed restricted. Those 4 deed restricted are excluded. They were probably private developments that weren't subsidized or backed by the government. And so you have a very small number of those. But the total number of deed restricted goes beyond those 4, as Jim pointed out.
Yeah, just 2 quick points.
Yeah, I want to clarify that a little more in case I didn't do an adequate job.
No, just to say that the 4 deeds, the 4 that we're calling deed restricted are in Newport Center at 848 Farmington Avenue, because they are deed restricted. The town was involved in that transaction, if you remember, and CHFA did not finance. It was financed by some private financing and a nonprofit financing. So that's how that was achieved. And I didn't hear Tim's full question, but there are other deed restricted units in subdivisions, but they don't meet the definition of the state, being, that they have to be at 80% of median income, and for a duration, the deed restriction has to be for a duration of at least 40 years. So those deed restricted units in some of the subdivisions don't count, as Francisco said, in terms of the big A affordable housing definition.
That's the deed restricted developments in town. Again, I'm not top of my head.
There's off of Sprucebrook Road.
Yeah,
That was the first one.
Yeah, Sprucebrook Road,
Fox Hollow or something.
Sprucebrook Road, the ones over at Kensington Road, Apple,
Whiskey Boulevard.
all Harbor Commons,
Whiskey Boulevard.
yeah, Whiskey Boulevard, the ones off of Flora Road and Tollgate, there was 6 or 8 units in there that are deed restricted to 80% of the median income. That's what the deeds called for on those properties. So I don't see those there. And
Yeah,
that's
just
why
to, yeah, just to clarify, if you remember, it was about 2 years ago, you redefined the deed restriction definition in the neighborhood affordable housing zone. And previously it was at 100% of median, and you redefined and bound to 80%. And so those units are not at 80%, and they weren't required to be 40-year duration. So those were the two problems with the units you're talking about.
Okay. I know that those units, those developments were 80% of the median income. It was Bill Volcker time when the development was built. But they were 80% of the median income. And there's still, those houses are still restricted as 80% of the median income. I know owners that own them. So I think it should be looked at again. That's
I'll look at it again, but I did do all that when we got 2 moratoriums under the Affordable Housing 830G. We looked at all the deed restrictions, and I guess I have to differ with you on that one, Tim, but we can recheck it for you, but I'm pretty confident that those were not.
I know the affordable housing things have been changed, the rules, but back 2000, 2005, something like that, when those units were building, they were built at 80%.
Okay, well, let's get into the trends. I'll show you some. Yeah, right. And one of the concerns here is, unfortunately, you do have development applications approved that are going to help you out here. One of the concerns is that as the 2020 numbers come out, you're going to have more housing units here in Berlin. That 8,000 is going to be bigger. That's your denominator is going to be bigger, which means that percentage, unless you're growing enough, that percentage would otherwise shrink. It's going to work against you when the 2020 census numbers come out. All right, we'll see that blip in the trends in a minute here. All right, well, let's look back to 2011 because we had the statewide numbers ready to go back to 2011 to compare you. And you're doing very well compared to the statewide town average. In 2011, you were at 7.2%, and you had pretty steady growth up to where you're at now in 2020. The state has been stuck at around 6% or so, the statewide town average. And in some areas, it's experienced losses either because there are less rental assistance vouchers, or because sometimes deed restricted properties that were built early enough are starting to come off now. Some of the I think the 15-year deed restricted are starting to come off the counts. So the state's been flat as a whole, and this is the statewide town average. So when we take each town's percentage and we divide it by 169, that's the number we get. So you're making a lot of progress compared to towns across the state. If we look a little further back for Berlin, what we see is going back to 2002, this real steady progression with the only down in that progression around 2010 when the 2010 housing numbers came out, and the housing numbers were higher, which shrunk your overall percentage of affordable housing because you had more units, so your share of affordable housing was smaller. But that was, I mean, those units were there, they were accumulating, they weren't counted yet. But you've been quickly rebounded and it's been growing since. So I think the key here, and we're going to get into this in far more detail when we start working the affordable housing plan, is you want to keep moving in that direction. And for a lot of reasons. One is, you don't want to be vulnerable to applications that you have no control over. And the other is because there's a demonstrated need for housing that's affordable. And in addition to the fact that you have a population of seniors that it might be looking for something more, for housing that's more affordable to them and would like to stay here in town. And affordable housing is a great option for them as well. Okay, so that concludes my presentation of all the trends and statistics. And we've talked about a lot of this as we went along, but I want to make sure we don't leave anything unaddressed. So let's start question by question here. Do any of these statistics or trends surprise you? Let's start with that. Nothing that besides the deed restricted numbers.
Not at all, because the town has been grown on the elderly side.
Yeah.
And that's been something. And as far as I'm concerned, the town has not addressed that because they haven't built those senior housing that we've been saying for 20 years that we need senior housing. And we have land for it, and but we're not doing it. Now they're addressing with a new senior center and stuff like that, but that's not going to be housing. And that's a good question I have right now. The senior housing that we have right here, does that go into the inventory? Because that is a low rate.
Yeah, the marginal mortgage, that was one of my concerns.
It's a low rate units. I'm just wondering if that goes into the calculation. That just came on top of my head.
I believe that it does, if I'm not mistaken.
As far as I should in the.
I hope I used it. I used its picture.
And
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
school and all that other stuff that we do have now. And the 55 over developments, those were restricted. 55 over, which was income restricted. So I'm asking about that off the top of my head too.
Okay.
But the improvement that the town has done, get to whatever figure you got, 9.24, is fabulous over the last shorter period of time, basically, and what we approved now. So what gets me mad when we got a report from what was that? We just got beat up on.
Open Community Alliance.
Open Community Alliance used 2004, 9, whatever the figures, and beat us up over our affordable housing. As far as I'm concerned, we're so far advanced than other towns in the state. It's just, I mean, we got to be up in the 75% part of it, and 75% have got to be, a lot lower, of the state. So I was just insulted by that report, because of the advances that we have done, and this commission has done overall. So there may be a little bit difference in numbers as far as in my head. I'm surprised that I see your figures now, and I'm positive your figures are right, because I did this study back in 2000, somewhere like that, about the population and everything else, because I was in real estate. And where our
Sure,
our buyers are coming.
sure.
That's
yeah.
where, that's what the study I did, where
Yeah.
our buyers come from, the Britain area. No doubt, all coming into Berlin, and, but they were the higher income people coming in too,
Mhm.
so, in the real estate market, applied it to the real estate market, it really changed the town.
Sure.
In that time
Yeah.
span. That's a.
Okay.
I don't think I'm surprised by the numbers. I mean, I'm originally from this town.
Mhm.
So I have a history in this town, and I love this town. People made fun of it for years when I was a kid. It was a cow town. If you sneezed on the Berlin Turnpike, you drive right past it, no one knew. No one knew where Berlin was. And now we're like the center of the attention, which I think is good and it's bad too. I think that people who live in this town like this town because it has a very special feel to it. Like some people will sing the praises of West Hartford and they'll say, why can't we be like Avon? Why can't we be like this? Why can't we be more effective? But there's something special about this town. And I think it goes beyond the town center. It goes actually to the country roads that belong to this town. And I think people get a little protective about that. And they want to make sure that it's endearing to them because once you lose it, it's gone. You're not going to get it back. And I think people feel safe in this town. I think people just look at it as a nice, wholesome community. I mean, we still say hello to our neighbors and stuff. I mean, obviously.
You actually interact with them.
Yeah,
you're
you
right.
actually will
Yeah.
interact, whereas if you
You're right.
go into a more populated area or whatever, you lose that specialty. People want to know if you're gonna rob them or something. So you have that sense of security in Berlin, and I think that attracts people. Ideally, the location is great because we're in the center, and as you've said, people just hop on the turnpike before they're glad when they get back home. So there's a specialness about the town that I'm very protective about. As far as what the concerns are, my concern is this sort of overreach of the Connecticut legislature or government and I'm not going to politicize this, I'm just going to say, to sort of feel threatened that, if you don't hit the 10%, then we're going to come and we're going to be able to do whatever we want in your town. You don't have any control over it. Well, that kind of gets my back up a little bit because we have worked very hard to reach 10%. But we also take our sense of community and the town into concern. And you would think that the central, Hartford or whatever legislature would look and say, instead of hammering us, they would say, look what Berlin's done, and they've done it their way. And everyone's happy with it. I mean, they're happy with the growth that's coming into the town center. They're happy with, they do have housing around the train station and stuff. And all that. So a lot of pluses. At this point, I don't have any one particular issue with the PLCD except to protect the character of the town.
The character of the town, town of Berlin's unique in one point, and I want to stress it, is that, we're 4 parts of town: South Kensington, Berlin, and East Berlin.
Sure.
And you ask each resident of each section where they live, there's going to be opinion. Now, we live in Kensington,
Right.
with a little explanation point.
That came out of the 80s.
We're the farmers out in South Kensington. Okay. Oh, you're on the other side of the turnpike. You need a passport to go to East Berlin, right?
Right.
And there's the regular people of Berlin.
Across the
Okay.
wall.
But that is the way the town has to be looked at because that's the way it's formed.
Yeah.
And it's formed years ago. If you looked at the history years ago by the churches.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
know?
Yeah.
And we were
All the communities were.
we were over half of New Britain and Plainville and everything
Yeah.
else, all that area, Kensington
Right.
was all, and then New Britain came and stole property from us.
Yeah.
That's another story. But
Anyway,
You know, when you're looking at the POCD, there is difference in each side of town. I think it needs a different lookout for each side of town, you know. East Berlin's the older houses, the older development, and the village, or if you want to call it, is that what they call it, the village? Okay.
I'm not saying
You know,
upper class, so I don't know.
Right, you got Wallen Hill and Kensington, you know. But that's what the town is, and it's not just one big development of a town that all acts the same. You know, that's why you get the little political ballots.
So
Tim,
I want to hold on to some of these ideas about who you are, because I do have the next slides are an exercise. So let's really quick, you know.
Before you do that, because I do have some commissioners that are online, so I didn't know if Diane Jorsey.
Yeah, let's hear from folks online.
Yeah. Diane, do you have any comments?
Any responses to any of these questions that hopefully you can see on screen?
Sorry, my alarm is going off.
Well, no.
He's barking away. But anyway, no, I do not have, I'm not surprised at all by any of the statistics that you're sharing with us. And I think both Joan and Tim have brought forth important considerations as we move forward, you know, with respect to the history of the town and how we got to where we are. So I'm interested to hear what more you have to say. It's the statistics are fascinating to me.
Okay, thank you, Diane. All right,
Yep.
sorry. Let's go. I just
Okay,
wanted to
yeah,
make sure
yeah,
that-
no, thank
Okay.
you, thank you.
Was Peter's here? Peter, do you have any comments or issues at this point, questions?
No, just echoing what everybody said. I think Berlin's a unique town, and there needs to be care taken to preserve the unique character of the town. And, you know, what comes to mind is particularly the Chamberlain Highway corridor through South Kensington and Kensington, while just trying to use and develop whatever properties we can without infringing or interfering with you know, residents or other country-like areas.
Okay, thank you. All right, and thank you for that.
Well, I think from the sounds of it, you're really eager to talk about what's special about this community. So I want to move on, because I have some slides that are designed exactly for that. We'll do, I know it's getting late, but I'd like to do a very brief visioning exercise to get us start thinking about what's special about this community and how you might want things to change, if at all. And you know, it's for your benefits, it's for myself as well, so I can convey this information to my staff so they have a better sense of what you're all about and what we need to be paying attention to. So that starts with you telling me, and I'm going to try to type this as we go, you telling me what it is that you value most about Berlin.
Location.
Yeah, okay, I will
It's-
write
it's a-
exactly that. Yeah.
It's the geographic center of the state.
Yeah.
That's right down on Savage Hill and Mill Street, the
Yep.
geographical center of the state.
Okay.
It used to be nicknamed the heart of Connecticut. Okay, someone up the state didn't like us using that slogan, so it's disappeared. But because of the road system around Berlin,
Yeah.
it is the hardest thing. 94, 91,
Sure.
whatever. Okay, you can go anywhere. I'm in the transportation business. You can go anywhere in 2 hours. That's my thing.
Sure.
Boston,
Your
Providence, New York, Albany.
mountains.
You
Yeah.
can go
Yeah.
anywhere in 2 hours.
Yep.
Okay.
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 That's a big building block for the town of Berlin, I think.
Especially for businesses, I think, as well.
This is economic growth.
They're a half hour anywhere in the
Yeah,
state.
contractors,
Yeah.
so HVAC guys or anything
Yeah.
like that.
I mean, the state is pretty much a rectangle and you can go to any corner, so that's.
About a half of everything.
You know, it's unbelievable, you know.
Mhm.
I have a couple thoughts.
That's the economy is.
Right. I would like to see us, as we go forward, protect the farmlands. I would like for us to maintain that sort of country, small town feel to it. I think we have to, I would like to see that we protect the water courseways through conservation easements. We have a lot of brooks or whatever that goes through town. I would like to see that we don't straighten out too many roads and we have our meandering roads. I would like to see more walking trails. Perhaps even along the water courseways or whatever, take advantage of being outside in the outdoors that we have. We have lots of trees and wonderful scenery here in town. And we just need a way to take advantage of it. Anyone online?
Yeah, so what do you value most? And I have a couple of additional slides about what you would like to see more of, or and what are you afraid of? But let's start with what you really like about Berlin. What do you value the most?
Diane and Peter, I'm gonna let you chime in because I want to give you equal opportunity.
Sure. Go ahead, Peter.
Oh, okay, thanks. Really, what I value is the accessibility to outdoor activities and conservation spaces. If you want to talk about being centrally located, I think that the town is absolutely surrounded by some phenomenal hiking trails, parks, and natural resources, and to have the ability to access them within 5 minutes from anywhere in town is absolutely phenomenal and very unique to the town of Berlin, especially given its location in a very densely populated state.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Diane, you want to add anything else, or Peter, do you have any?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. The things I think, for me personally, the things that I hold closest to my heart are the history of our town. When you look back over the centuries, actually, at Berlin's history and how the town came about, the numbers of very old historical houses that still remain within the town, and the history of the brick factories and the pistol making and all of those things, I think are really important to our heritage. And then for me, from a personal level, absolutely the agriculture. I'm a third generation farm owner in the town of Berlin, and I look around me and I feel like I'm the only one. And yet, you hear comments or you see comments on social media about Berlin being an agricultural town, and all kinds of verbal support for agriculture in the town. But it is very difficult to really have an agricultural business in town that can sustain itself. And my husband and I both work full-time jobs, and then we work full-time on the farm to sustain what we've been lucky enough to inherit from my grandparents. Those are the two things I think are important. I would like to see an emphasis on development of businesses along the Berlin Turnpike. I think that is an area that most of the citizens of the town wonder why we haven't done more with it. We as the Planning and Zoning Commission know that. Between that area and the Golden Triangle, which seems to be like There's some interest maybe in something happening there. Those are areas where I think we can develop the town and really offer some relief maybe from a tax perspective to the residents in town outside of those districts. And then the things that concern me or scare me a little bit, I've mentioned in past meetings with our commission, I really want to look at protecting the town's water resources. The city of New Britain and the city of Meriden each have reservoirs that are located within the town of Berlin. I suspect that both cities are probably not paying taxes on that property. I know that Meriden has sort of threatened Berlin on acting or activating one of the wells located along the Chamberlain Highway in South Kensington when there was a request to change the zone from POCD to a residential zone. And so there are things that those cities have done for their benefit to protect their water supply that Berlin is going to lose out on. And so I look at that and say that we need to stand up for ourselves and fight back and protect our residents from claims of eminent domain. We need to protect our residents as far as having clean water in the future.
Very good. Yeah, I forgot about that one. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I
Yep.
would agree with that point. Because I mean, yeah, we got a really good rain year this year, but it wasn't too long ago where we were all getting the notifications to,
Yeah.
use water.
Yeah. I don't know if you know the system, but what happened in town is all the ponds, clean ponds, were sold to the city of Britain or Meriden, okay, for $1, whatever. And they pipe the reservoirs over to New Britain. They filter it and sell it back to Berlin. Okay, so that's always been a sore spot. My thing, why do we give these ponds away when we could have our own water source?
Yeah.
But the aquifer on this town is excellent. Okay? There is a problem with one of the well sites now. Just say that out loud, but the aquifers can be done and drilled, and we can basically get more efficient supplying ourselves. And that I think should be in the plan of doing.
Okay.
All
All right.
So,
Steve, but let me just ask Steve if there's anything else you want to add in.
No, Tim kind of touched on the water supply
Okay.
with
Yeah,
the
thank you.
water
Brian.
coming back from New Britain, we buy it when we need it.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted
got
to
it,
share.
got it. And before, so my other, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm writing it all down. My other questions for you following this question was going to be, what would you like to see more of in Berlin, and what are your concerns? What concerns you about the future? And so we're touching upon all of that. But before we dive any further into what you would like to see done or more of, and what concerns you, I want to hear a little bit more about what it is that you value about Berlin. Why do you choose to live here? What's special about this place? What's important to you about Berlin? What's unique about it? And we talked about that a little bit, location and the farmlands and the nature and the open spaces and access and that sort of thing, the heritage and the history. What else?
It's more of a peaceful atmosphere
Okay.
in Berlin.
Yeah.
Like I say, you can
It's not
know your
busy.
neighbors
Yeah.
and everything else. That's a great
It's
thing.
not snooty.
And one thing that we've done, I wanted to bring up
Well, some of the.
through this commission over the years is that we zoned with uh, development for the developer can build, what they call it, the spot, not, the development with the actual land to give to the town.
Open space
Open space
subdivision.
subdivision, okay, there we are, open space subdivision. Okay. And the town land trust. We, over the years, we have opened up land through the trust and the town properties that making greenways now through town. Okay, I like to see. I think a lot of those greenways are connected now. Okay, because of the development we have. We want to see if those greenways are developed. Are they viable for passive recreation trails or whatever through the town along with, because most of them are along streams and stuff or wetlands, whatever. But that greenways, I think, are pretty much established now over the last 15, 20 years that we've done it. And you know, I think that really should look at it. That's a great resource to the town of Berlin, those greenways.
Okay.
You know, and to
Okay.
you know, because we got our bicentennial park now with trails, and we've got to. I mean, I think we're one of the biggest towns with town-owned greenways in the area. I mean, we own a lot of land through the town.
I've had the map out in my office the last couple of days. Sorry, I didn't bring it.
Yeah, I mean,
I've been working on
it's
it.
amazing. It's amazing what we acquired over the years.
Yeah, okay.
Through this
All right.
So your open space is really important
Our
part of
open
the
space,
community,
yeah,
and you see some real potential there to do a better job linking.
Yeah, linking them
okay.
together,
Yeah, it would be kind of nice if you had like a walking.
hiking
bike,
trails, whatever.
Yeah.
Walking
Okay.
bike trail, almost like they do along the Farmington River, not that wide, but you know, if you had something like that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's-
I do think that, you
Great
know, as they had mentioned before, I'd like to see, you know, I mean, to look at the development of the Berlin Turnpike. And hopefully, I mean, that's a real tough project
Yeah.
because of the size of the properties, and instead of buying one parcel, you have to sort of knit everything together, and they're sort of odd sizes. So you have one family owns this, one family owns this. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's hard to get consistent development in there. The
Okay.
other thing that I would like to see, my secret project down through the years, is I would love to see Main Street bury those wires on the ground.
So I'm going to go to the next slide because you guys are so
Yeah.
eager to talk
So
about it.
eager about
Yeah,
it.
would you like to see more of?
Yeah.
So that's okay. What we can
We're
do is
ahead of
we
you,
can-
huh?
We can keep coming back to this
Oh, yeah.
over the course, and it's going to evolve. Where we're going with this is we want to get to a vision statement that really frames what it is we're trying to accomplish with the plan. That is kind of like our mission, and it helps us think about the types of recommendations, types of goals and strategies and action items you need to include in your plan. The vision statement will be a paragraph, a couple sentences that say, this is who we are, this is what's important to us, and this is what we need to work towards. It's something very simple that helps to capture and frame who you are and who you aspire to be. And that will be part of the plan. And we'll check all the ideas that get floated. We'll check it against that vision statement. Say, does that help us? Does that match up with our vision statement? If not, you know, it's not a priority or it's not included. And so that's what we're working towards. We're just getting a start on that. And so we can come back to this every month and just add a little bit. And once I have enough here, I'll put that into a draft paragraph vision statement. And we'll work that. We'll work that all the way through to the very end. Okay.
Right.
So what would you like to see more of in Berlin? I have, and I might have missed something here, but I have developed more businesses along the Berlin Turnpike, provide more water supply from the aquifer and protect the water supply, do a better job protecting. Further establish greenways or provide greenways connecting open space. I hear and is it in Kensington Center to, or was it another location in town to bury the utility lines?
It's Kensington Center.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
the Main Street.
There's no
Yeah.
really, no really Berlin Center. It's
Yeah,
Kensington
yeah.
Center. Just because those
Well,
districts
you're
again.
talking about these
Yeah.
4 districts, so I wasn't
Yeah,
sure. Yeah. So,
Don't worry about that, Brownsville.
right, so,
It is.
I live in Berlin.
So
it is.
I actually live in
yeah,
Kensington.
yeah,
I-
right.
It's-
Where it's like the Webster Bank.
It's,
Yeah.
it's, it's old.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
we're
don't
gonna
want to
keep
get too
running.
late.
Okay, all right. So anything else that you would like to see more of?
I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more entertainment. I mean, we have some nice restaurants and stuff like
Okay,
that. We have
more
mini golf.
entertainment.
Yeah,
I think something you'd be more.
Arts and then.
I know, and the other thing too is what I'd like to see is I'd like to see our Parks and Rec. We have a great park called Veterans Park over by Stop and Shop, but it's big, it's got a gazebo, walkway and stuff. I would love to see them do summer concerts. They're doing them all over the place. And they're free
Yeah.
concerts and people just bring their lunch or whatever. And they set up a chair and a lot of times it's band music and it's just for like 2 hours. They did them down Westbrook, Rocky Hill, I think Plainville or Southington had some. But all during, but just, it's like for 8 weeks. That's what they do. They do a concert, a free concert every Friday night. It's great.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
And
Okay.
when they talk about sense of community, yeah,
Right. So this, I think that you just said it's all coming back to community.
yeah.
And I heard you talking about, people and how they're friendly to each other and talk to each other. So it sounds like you're describing that there's a strong sense of community here.
Yeah,
And you'd like more to reinforce that, and more
Yeah.
opportunities for the community to gather and come together.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a
Okay.
lot of older families that have been here for generations and generations, and the kids have stayed in town. And, we know our neighbors, because our neighbors are the nephews of this family, blah, blah, blah. And everyone seems to have some kind of, going back to what Diane said, a history. So the town has a very wonderful history with George Washington slept here kind of a thing.
Yep.
And, it should be preserved and it should be actually elevated, in a sense. I'm very sorry we lost our train station.
Yeah, that was-
We had a historic train station that was on the registry and they wiped that one out.
Mhm.
But that was very bad, because that was a beautiful little place.
I mean, just
But
back to the
that should
history, I
be
think
preserved.
we have the oldest Civil War monument in the
Yeah,
country.
Yeah.
and we have some of the graves that we have. Morton Road has a little.
Oh, yeah.
A Potter's Field there.
Yeah.
These dates you can't even read because they're all
Oh, yeah.
Civil War.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, but that's wonderful stuff.
Okay.
One thing that I capitalize on her a little bit is that it brings me up the Berlin Fair just happened.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're fair.
This town, the Berlin Fair is reunion time, basically.
Oh,
The only time you'll see someone else from town is when you go to the Berlin Fair. You see all your
Is that the
all your
fair?
people you grew up with and everything else, right, at the Berlin Fair. If there was arts or entertainment of something like you said,
There might be
a
more
band,
frequent.
a little
those
band
meetings.
shell with a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
thing or something like that, that people come every once in a while and get that mixture going.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Okay.
Westport did a wonderful thing. They had a gazebo there that was on the green. And the band set up, the drummer was in the gazebo and the band was out on front. And you just brought a lawn chair, you sat in front. That was it. 2 hours later, everyone go home.
My
Okay,
daughter
bye.
lives in Simsbury right now, and they have a damn shell, and they have little functions going there all the time. Once a month, there's something going there. And the Arts Council there, they have different statues all the way down through town, that you had a walking trail
Oh,
to go
yeah,
see
yeah.
all these statues,
Okay.
And to get the Art Council or art, whatever they call it in town, together with that and doing events like that. We do the scarecrow. That started the little event. Scarecrows on farm.
All right, so I'm,
All right.
I'm seeing more,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
more opportunities for the community to
To
come together, more
come together.
cultural
Yes,
opportunities.
yes,
Okay, I
cultural
got it.
arts, entertainment.
All right, well, let's hear from people online. Anything else you would like to see more of in
Diane,
Berlin?
Peter?
Yeah. I think there needs to be better pedestrian access in terms of additional sidewalks and bikeways. And I say that because there's plenty of residential streets, but there are main thoroughfares that really aren't conducive to walking on with very narrow shoulders or moving about in town on bicycles. And if we have a train station that we're trying to use as a central focal point along with the village we're developing on Main Street, I think that having more thought into how to make the area more walkable, safer, and attractive would help draw people into that area versus, oh, we need to get in the car. And I also think taking a broader look at how to work with surrounding towns to create a more comprehensive either bicycle or walking network in a more formal setting of a greenway.
Great. Thank you.
Diane, anything you want to add?
Only just to add on to Peter's comment that the city of New Britain with the New Britain Bees being right on the boundary of our town seems to be a fantastic opportunity for us as a town to bring people in to use our restaurants, and that the New Britain Road area could possibly benefit from some of the business that they bring in.
Okay, great.
Is there anything?
Anything else to add before we talk about what your concerns are or fears? And once again, we'll come back to this month after month. Okay, so let's get on really quick. It's getting late in the evening. So what are you worried about for Berlin's future? What concerns you? What do we need to be paying attention?
Always tax base.
On?
It's always tax base.
That is the most popular response. Very often, we don't even, on an online survey, we don't even provide it as an option because everyone so that's it. And every
Everyone has
community
their
across the
opinion on
state.
it.
But
Everyone
I'll,
has their opinion on
yeah,
it, you know,
yeah.
and,
okay, yeah, tax rates.
you know,
Now, tax rates or tax base? Which one?
tax base.
Tax base.
The economic developer has been doing a fabulous job
Okay,
of bringing in manufacturing,
yeah,
restaurants. I mean, 89, 90, whatever things in the last year and a half.
okay,
Okay, he's a hustler. You're right. You know, but our vision may be a little bit different, but I think everything that comes in is an extra thing for us. Definitely. It's just I think we could just capitalize on that, in our manufacturing maybe or something to start getting our tax base a little bit more, stabilized.
so when we talk about what concerns you about the future, is your concern that growth will stall or that you'll actually lose businesses?
I think my concern is that growth will overwhelm us.
Or growth will overwhelm?
Yeah.
What kind of growth? What kind of growth?
Population growth.
Okay.
I feel that, there's that pressure, like that state
Okay.
mandated pressure. And I think that, the fear is that you start to lose or negotiate the things that you like about the town. You start negotiating them away, farmland disappearing and stuff. It's too bad.
Okay, so the real concern there is really about the character of the town being lost to growth that would impact that would adversely impact the character, right?
And I think it's very important. For me anyway, as I look forward to find a happy medium where I can have the growth along like the turnpike or whatever, and have some control where you can have you know, you can take into account the aesthetics of the building and blah, 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 to sort of
Sure.
enhance the town or whatever.
Okay.
Like we do with our Farmington guidelines.
Yeah, almost like that.
Right.
Diane or Peter, is there anything you want to say about that question? I'll jump to you.
Yeah, your concerns about the future.
Yes.
for Berlin.
So I already mentioned the concerns that I have with respect to the water supply for the town.
Right. Yep.
The other thing that we haven't talked about, but is directly correlating to the tax base, is the future of our emergency services.
Okay.
Berlin is reliant totally on volunteer firefighters.
Yeah.
And it's harder and harder for the fire departments to find the volunteers that they need and to maintain the training that's required. And people have less and less time to dedicate to that. And I see our town in the future facing the need to have at least a portion of our emergency services on the payroll. And if
Yeah.
people are concerned about taxes now, boy, look out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a very
No,
good point.
It's excellent.
Yeah.
Point.
That study was done, and it's amazing
All right,
what the
hang on.
cost could be.
Yes,
For
yes.
that,
Let me-
seeing that the fire department, and one thing you should know is that there is 4 fire departments in town.
Yeah,
There's only one building owned by the town of Berlin.
okay,
The fire departments
The
are
others
owned
are-
by the
right.
volunteers,
Right.
okay.
okay? The town of Berlin only supplies
The
the
trucks,
equipment,
yeah.
okay?
All right,
So that's a big.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, all right. Got
So that, and this, right, this is an issue a lot of towns like Berlin are facing. It's happening in a lot of towns.
Yeah.
All right, we're almost bumping up against 9:30 here, so it's getting
Okay.
pretty late. Does anyone want to add anything else? And like I said, we can come back to this. I have just a couple slides to close us out this evening.
No, I think we're good.
Okay, so next steps. We are going to ease into community engagement. That includes developing a press release to let people know that the planning process is underway. Figuring out what kind of social media channels we could use to help promote the planning process. We'll start development of an online survey. That will be one of the first outreach tools that we use. We're also going to build a mapping tool that allows people to drop in comments geographically in town, and zoom in, pan around, add a pin to an area where you have a comment, you'd like to see something. We're going to start developing a list of key stakeholders that we want to interview or meet with in focus group meetings. We're starting to pull together our mapping through New England Geo, which is the town's vendor, and we have some of our own mapping. So in future meetings, you're going to start to see more maps associated with the data. We're going to continue collecting data in preparation for the affordable housing plan. And we are moving on to our land use and zoning assessment, which will be which is our recommended topic for the next meeting. So as we look forward through this fall and into April, and that, of course, April, that doesn't take us all the way to the end here, that just takes us to about the midway point. The rest of our discovery or existing conditions phase. We are recommending the following meeting topics. I can coordinate more with Maureen on Jim with this, just to make sure that this lines up with their expectations. But what we're recommending as we take a look at kind of a logical flow of things is at next month's meeting, we cover all issues related to land use and zoning, and then we move on to conservation, open space, and recreation, followed by cultural and historic resources, then January facilities and infrastructure, followed by mobility and transportation, then economic development, and then moving into affordable housing, really getting geared up with our affordable housing work in the spring, in late winter, early spring. And then we'll be all through at each one of these meetings, we'll be updating you on the status of community engagement efforts and really be looking to you to help guide us in making decisions about when and how to do community engagement. There's a lot of work to be done on that front. And then we're also, as I mentioned, the affordable housing plan, we're bouncing around the idea of putting together a committee that's specific to this plan, that would steer this plan, the state's guidebook, and that's a page from their guidebook. They recommend establishing a committee. It's possible to do that just with the commission. Committee affords us the chance to really bring in other members into the discussion, get a more diverse perspectives on the need for housing. So that's something we've got some time to figure this out, but it's something we need to be thinking about.
Francisco, just to
Jim,
comment that we plan to have, we started to have this discussion on a staff basis with also corporation counsel advice. And we're gonna bring this to, we're gonna have a discussion item at the next town council meeting. And there's gonna be a presentation by corporation counsel on the guidebook and the recommendations on the committee. And the committee basically would be, if it's established, to be established by the town council. And we expect that, as advice of council, that the town council would be actually the entity that would approve the affordable housing plan.
Okay. Thank you for the update. And so it's something we just want to impress upon you, the fact that things are moving already on the affordable housing front, plan front, even though we haven't started the plan itself. In our next meeting, and I have this correct, right?
I have it at the 28th. So
Is
the
it the
fourth Thursday, yes.
Oh, okay, fourth Thursday. Let me fix that
Fourth
right now.
Thursday.
I'm gonna fix that while we
So you
speak.
have to, right? I think so.
While
We
we,
went back and forth several times, so.
Okay.
We have two planning and zoning.
I'm gonna fix that right now so that we have it entered into the record.
Yeah, there's a regular planning and zoning commission meeting on the
Okay.
21st, so it can't be.
Okay. Oh, that was our regular meeting. That's why I
That's a
had the
regular
date. It
meeting.
was but we have special meetings. Gotcha. Okay. So it's the 28th for the record, and we will meet at 7 o'clock again, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And probably here. We'll try to meet in this room.
I am gonna re-share my screen.
We might be able to move to the engineering room, but because we now have a screen in there too.
Re-share the screen for the record. Okay, and so our next meeting's the 28th, and that concludes our meeting for this evening. That's a
All
wrap.
right, thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
You ending the meeting for us?
And-
Or do you want to end the meeting, Joan, officially?
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, please do, please do.
So it's 9:31, and I'm gonna call the, do we need a motion to adjourn?
Sure.
No?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, thank you, Brian. Seconded by Diane. And thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Bye,
Very good
everyone.
presentation.
Have a good night.
Very informational.
It was interesting.
Yeah, it was enjoyable.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Good
That's
night,
all